I'm in Huntsville, Texas, the execution capital of America. I'm trying to understand what the appropriate punishment is for killing another human being. It was here in 1982 that the first execution by lethal injection took place.
The old electric chair is crated up, and a lethal cocktail of drugs awaits the prisoner when he's finally led from the death house cell to the waiting trolley.
Since then, over 590 people have been killed here using that method. I can't help thinking about the people who are involved in that process. I want to know more about how it works. I've come to America's largest prison cemetery to meet Jim Willett, the former warden of the Walls Unit.
You notice the crosses with the EX in front of the number?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, those are people who were executed.
Around 3,000 prisoners have been laid to rest here since the 1850s, including many of those who were executed. Can you imagine a place like this in Britain? Would we be comfortable at this reminder of what ultimate justice looks like?
If you see some of these old numbers like that, they died in an electric chair, which was used up until through 1964.
Jim became warden in 1998. His 3 years in the job coincided with the busiest period ever known for an American death chamber.
I know there was one time we did I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 in 15 days.
Wow.
Yeah, that was the first time and the only time that I ever felt really emotionally drained. It's a hell of a thing to watch a man die.
I'm going with Jim to meet 2 of his former colleagues who were part of what was known as the tie-down team. They haven't met up like this for years. Hello, fellas.
Yeah, that's both of y'all. Kenneth.
Nice to meet you. You must be Kenneth? Okay. Bit of a reunion, this, is it?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Long overdue.
It was a family.
Yeah.
It really was. Yeah. Because nobody can really understand what we do. It's not something you can go home to your wife and say, well, here's what we did.
Yeah, what did you do today? Yeah.
Yes,
The bond that you make being with that group, I would tell Kenneth things that I wouldn't tell anybody else.
We don't put people to death in the United Kingdom, but I think it's a constant debate. You know, we come here and we think about the numbers of people that you guys were involved in that execution process. And what can you take us through that time? What was the timing on the day?
Well, the inmate usually got there in the early afternoon.
And then the execution is set for 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock.
And then what do they do in between that? Do they
Spend most of the afternoon with the chaplain. They get their last meal, and that's their afternoon.
Part of the mythology, I suppose, of this is that practice of the last meal. Was there any limit on what they could order, what they could have for that meal?
Well, to the extent that a guy could order anything that was available in the prison system. If he came in and ordered, say, 3 cheeseburgers and some fries, well, we fixed it up and carried it to him.
Yeah.
And does the last meal, does that still exist?
Not anymore. That stopped when there was an offender who ordered quite a bit of food, everything you can think of, fried chicken, hamburgers, tacos, lasagna, anything you can think of, he ordered. And when he got there, he was car sick and didn't eat anything on the table. So
That changed it for everybody.
yeah.
For the inmates, with the final meal finished, it was then time for the execution.
At 6 o'clock, I'd walked up to him and I'd call him by his last name and say, it's time to go with me to the next room. And one of these guys would unlock the cell and I'd say, follow me. I would turn around and say, get up on the gurney. And there was 2 medical people in there and they would start putting the IVs in one arm.
So you're there all the time talking.
Oh yeah, trying to keep his mind off what's going on over here.
Okay.
And some of these guys would be escorting the witnesses in. And then my boss would step out of the room and say, "Warden, you can proceed with the execution." And I'd tell the inmate, "So-and-so, you can make your statement." The signal to the executioner that it's time for him to do his job was we removed our glasses. And he'd start the fluids to flowing, and usually within 30, 45 seconds, this guy would take his last breath.
Listening to you describe it, it sounds quite procedural, but
Mechanical.
yeah, you all realised the significance of what you were doing.
Yes.
Yeah, it's hard to see when you go back in to unstrap them. Most of them still have their eyes open, and it was always hard for me to look at.
Yes.
If you could have your time over again, would you do anything differently?
I think I would have liked to have sat down with the inmates and ate a little bit with them at their last meal.
If I was asked to be on the tie-down team again, I feel like I would do it. I mean, because it's carrying out a law that's set by the state, and that's who I work for.
And what can I ask you why you still feel so strongly for it?
My faith has a lot to do with it. I was shown this Bible verse that was Romans 13:4. It says, "For he is God's servant to do you good. But if you do wrong, you should be afraid, for he does not bear the sword for anything. He is God's servant, an agent of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer." And I'm reading this thinking, well, this is me.
It's interesting that they all mentioned their faith straight away as their justification for why they believe it is still the right thing to do. And that's given me quite a bit to think about because, I'm a Christian. I follow the same God that they were talking about in there. And yet for me, I look at the mercy and the compassion in the teachings of Jesus Christ. So while I'm not perhaps on the same page as them, I hugely respect them for, one, being honest with us, but also when you consider the job that they have done and what they have seen. It's just days until Huntsville will have its next execution. The man set to be killed is 37-year-old Steven Nelson. News reports are already building up to it.
You may remember this case. It goes back to 2011. Steven Nelson said he was on the lookout for a robbery that quickly spiraled out of control. Arlington pastor Clint Dobson was suffocated to death, his secretary badly beaten.
I wonder what the mood is like on death row when an execution is near. When I spoke to Charles Thompson, I asked him about that. Charles, what do you know about the person who is next in line to be executed in Texas?
He seemed to be a good guy. I've lived around him before.
This is Steven Nelson.
Yeah, he's a stand-up convict. I've never had any problems with him. And the man says he's innocent, and he's trying to stop his execution. It's hard. It's a hard fight. He's got the biggest challenge of his life coming up.
I've come to Austin in Texas to speak to one person who is continuing to fight for Steven Nelson. Reverend Jeff Hood is a spiritual advisor to dozens of inmates on death row. We meet at the state capitol, home of the lawmakers. Jeff, in the state of Texas, do you think the majority of the population here would support the death penalty?
It's not just that they support the death penalty, they lust over it. They love it.
Jeff is a vocal critic of capital punishment.
When it comes to the death penalty, it makes God nauseous.
Which I imagine is quite inflammatory language around here.
Well, I mean, we're inflammatory people, if nothing else, here in the South.
Jeff not only comforts prisoners in the final months of their lives. In the last 2 years, he has accompanied 8 men into the death chamber for their executions.
right over here, in all of its Texas's lunacy, is this monument to the Ten Commandments.
Ah,
It just shows how full of shit the state of Texas really is. That they're gonna put on the monument, "Thou shalt not kill," as they continue to kill. I mean, all of these people that I have loved and worked with, they killed. And then they're gonna put a monument that says, "Thou shalt not kill."
Jeff has become known as the man who comforts the condemned. I want to know what kind of impact witnessing those executions is having on him.
If Steven Nelson is executed, he'll be the 9th guy that I've been with in the chamber. There's nobody else in the United States that's done more.
What is that like? And are they all different?
It's hell. Yeah, it's hell. It's horrible. I mean, you know, you're looking at someone who is perfectly well, perfectly healthy, and they are talking to you, and, you know, they are asking for prayer, and then all of a sudden, they're dead. And they have been murdered right in front of your eyes. You know, and it presents this interesting question. How do you teach a population not to murder people by murdering people? And that's what we're talking about. I mean, that's the sort of fucked up. Did y'all allow cussing on this?
Well, you're the first priest I've met who's dropped the F-bomb on me.
Fair enough.
There will be people who will think this is deserved, and
Well, they're assholes. I really believe that. I mean, I know that, like, you know, that's a sensational way of saying it, but you've got to be a real asshole to think that you are so pious that you get to judge who gets to live or dies. You know, the moral injury of being a part of this cannot be understated. It's an impossible situation. Do you jump on the gurney and try to save him? Do you try to rip the cords out, or do you try to lunge for the tube? If you do that, like, you won't be there for the next guy.
for Jeff, that next guy is Steven Nelson. For months, they have been speaking to each other as they prepare for his execution date.
So when you've got all this time, do you find yourself just doing a lot of meditating?
I find myself meditating, but also find myself just sitting down, being still, just thinking a lot, you know? When you're just waiting to be executed, it breaks a little piece of you, like, every day, you know? It chips away. But I find myself being chipped away, but also catching those chips and gluing them back onto me, you know?
Can I ask you what his mental state is like at the minute?
You know, I think that he wants to stay in a place where he don't want to talk about it a lot, what's coming. And I think that's hard for me because, you know, here I am trying to sort of prepare him to die. And he told me the other day that he wants to prepare himself daily to live.
For now, Jeff is praying for a miracle. Since 1976, only 3 death row prisoners in Texas have been granted clemency. Steven Nelson faces lethal injection. But elsewhere, there are death chambers designed to use even more shocking methods.